know our speaker today? Has everybody been? Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay, when you do speak, I'll let you give you your 35 seconds of whatever. Okay, call the meeting to order. Okay, every law person we've had here for the last time either says, yes, we call the roll, or no, we don't. Why don't you call the roll?
Absolutely. Good morning. Mr. Ramey?
Here.
Mr. Murray?
Here.
Mr. Nichols?
Here.
Mr. Stahl?
Good morning.
Mr. Allen?
Here.
Mr. Orzak?
Here.
And Mrs. Reeder's here. Steve Tomasula and Dan Moncher asked to be excused today. I'm not sure if Jim will be joining us later or not.
So moved.
Okay.
Hey.
So, meeting's opened, and approval of the February 9th, 2024 minutes.
Move to approve.
Moved, approved. Can I get a second on that from somebody?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Second. I don't think we need to do any roll calls or anything. Okay. So, we have got that taken care of. Now we're going to go right straight into new business. We're going to get our financial debt.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
we need to approve the minutes by, we don't have to do a roll call, but by yea or nay.
Okay. I thought I did that, but thank you, sir. Okay. I thought I had a motion for the minutes.
You got a motion second, just,
This, okay, a vote.
aye.
All approved. Thank you, sir. I was already thinking about this, meaty, nice stuff about debt service, and actually, somewhat important. There are so many different ways that cities and governmental agencies and people can finance, and we've had our expert here. Man, I tell you, you've been around almost as many years as I have, and that's, so I guess I'm going to go ahead and get started with the debt summary. Okay.
It's up here.
Supposed to come up? Okay, it came up.
It'll go to the screen for him that way.
Mike,
It's over here. Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces. Joe and I do have a history.
okay.
Yeah, you were still in college, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so he interned for us and certainly knows the guts of what we do, and it's great to see you up here, Jimmy. So yeah, thanks for inviting us back. Michelle, thanks for coordinating this. Definitely one of the most interesting years in our time here with Sandusky, pulling all this information together. Lots of projects coming to fruition, and Al, to your point, yeah, there are a lot of ways to slice and dice debt for political subdivisions in Ohio, although sometimes we feel like we're in a very narrow lane because there's lots of statutory requirements that have to be met and can't be exceeded. And that's why, we label this a capacity analysis, because just like your personal finances, the state basically imposes credit card limits on cities and counties and schools. And that's a large part of what we've looked very closely at with all the activity that's planned for the city this year and the next couple of years. So that's really what we're trying to focus on here. Just to guide the conversation, these are the things that we'll be looking at. We'll summarize all the debt that's outstanding and planned for the city, and then we'll get into actual amounts and limitation tests, and then give you a little overview on current interest rates to put it all in perspective. So with the current outstanding debt, we have about 23 million outstanding, and not a overly excessive amount for a city the size of Sandusky, but if you look on the bottom part, we're about to double that, a little bit more than double that. And no surprises to anybody. We've, these plans for the landings and the rec center have been in the works for a long time. And we'll go into some affordability analysis as well about how all this debt is going to get addressed out of the, from a budgetary perspective. One note on this, we have $12,270,000 worth of notes that mature in September. $10 million of that is for the Justice Center work, and we this year plan to, or at least the plan is to take that $10 million into bonds or long-term debt, take it out of short-term debt, which is what it's in now. And then the first line on the new debt, the $4.785 million, the $12 million will get reduced to that $4.785. That $785 also includes $885,000, I believe, of pay downs on the outstanding debt. And then Michelle has some new things that she's adding to that. I can't think of the details on what's getting added.
Columbus Avenue.
Columbus Avenue, right. The streetscape project is going to be added back. And short term, until that project is complete, once we know all the final costs of that project, then we'll consider taking the streetscape debt to long-term bonds as well. Sorry for the small print here, but this is more a working tool for Michelle on a daily basis on, all the different debt issues that are outstanding. This first one here is the actual total debt service requirements of each of these issues on an annual basis through the life of each of the issues. And the next page, page 4, is just the principal pay downs on each of those. Just to give everybody a sense for, the decisions that have been made on how long some of this new debt is going to take to mature, as well as to give a perspective on older debt that is rolling off and will make room, if you will, from a budgetary perspective for some of these new obligations. And this is a slide here on page 5 that we haven't had before, but again, this year with all the activity, I thought was terribly important to share with everyone the revenue sources that are intended to be utilized to make these debt service payments. The city's done a great job over the last 10 years since the passage of Issue 8 to watch its P's and Q's and figure out, which buckets to put the revenues in, and with cooperation with Cedar Point and, parking and admission taxes, we have a nice revenue base to tap to make these debt service payments. The burden on the general fund these are 2025 debt service numbers, with the exception of the rec center, which will not come on the rolls until it's not planned to come on the rolls till next year. Nothing's in writing. That obviously construction hasn't started, contracts haven't been let, so that's a future borrowing. But to give everyone a perspective on what the long-term future looks like, we thought we'd add it here so everyone was clear on where those sources of repayment were going to come from. And then this is where the rubber hits the road on the two different debt limitation tests that every city needs to meet in Ohio. First, the direct debt, debt limit, which is a limitation on debt service payments. Okay, and there is, well, actually, it's on the amount of it uses debt service payments, but it takes the total debt and it uses two measures for the limitation. One is a 5.5% of assessed valuation test, and that's on total debt outstanding. And that's for 5.5% can be issued by any municipality in Ohio without a vote of the people. Once you go over 5.5%, you have to get a vote of the people to approve it. And even with that limit is 10.5%. unless you invoke some of the other methods for repaying debt that we can talk about in a second. So the total available debt limitation after you add all the new debt in and take out a few exempted pieces like that are shown kind of towards the middle bottom of the special assessment debt, some other self-supporting water and sewer debt, they are not included in the limitation because they have their own source of payment. This is a general obligation test. General obligation being the full faith and credit of the city to repay its obligations. And that means that any revenue source of the city can be used to repay these debts. The ones that are exempted are ones that say, okay, this one bond for water improvements can only be, Mr. or Mrs. Investor can only be paid from water system revenues. So if there's a default for some reason or whatever, the investors only have access to water revenues to remedy the default, not the entire revenue stream of the city. General obligation is the pledge of all city resources to repaying debt, and that's what this test is intended to limit. So right now, on an unvoted basis, we have, after all this debt is issued and after all the exemptions are made, we're taking, especially mainly because of the landings debt, we've worked that limitation down to just over $3 million for available new projects, emergencies, whatever other issues the city might come up with. You know, it is what it is, and there are perhaps some less palatable ways to increase that number if we ever need to, but right now this is kind of the methods that have been shared with us that the finance department chooses to invoke to repay this debt and result in $3.3 million of available limitation. If there were an emergency or some other project that needed to exceed that, then a referendum could be put in front of the voters for voter approval, and if that happens, the limitation goes up to just over $30 million. And one thing that's included in that $3 million, or excluded, if you will, is $10 million for the Justice Center, because last year, maybe 2 years ago now, we were watching the debt limitation and the projects that were planned to come on board, and we looked at the Justice Center as one element that could be structured in a way that did not have a detrimental impact on the debt limitations. And the one method that political subdivisions in Ohio can invoke is certificates of participation financing, which, through the magic of the legislation, is not debt. It's an obligation to repay, but it is not debt, and therefore it doesn't go against the debt limitations. It's a $10 million financing. Again, it's outstanding in general obligation notes right now, but the plan is to convert that to certificates of participation so that it will take it off of the direct debt limit calculation. The certificates of participation, to most folks, it looks just like a bond issue, but what it actually is a lease that you get a kind of a paper organization, a middleman to actually own the property and lease it back to the city. And because it's a lease structure, it's not considered debt by the limitation test. So that entity is probably going to be the, again, paper organization that Squire Patton Boggs, the city's bond counsel, has in place to act as that, if you will, that leasing agent for many political subdivisions in Ohio, and I expect that's who they will probably utilize for this financing. But the participation part of that is it's one lease for $10 million, but you, like with any bond issue, you're out there getting 100, 150, 200 investors to buy that debt. So those investors are participating in that lease. So that's where the language comes from. But it's a single borrowing by the city that is intended to be utilized to take it out of the debt limitation calculation and give the city some more room within its limitation. We've been through this very constructive discussions with Mr. Murray on this, and can I ask, are we satisfied with where interest rates are these days?
I mean, they are where they are, and there's no getting around them. I'd like them to be lower, a lot of us would too, but
Yeah.
we have to deal with the reality that exists before us. I think that the proposal that you're about to make is eminently sensible, and I think it presents the best option for maintaining the city's flexibility going forward. It is entirely financially responsible, so.
Great. And I will discuss interest rates at the end of the presentation, and they are actually a little better in some spots. So the second debt limitation test is called the indirect limitation, and it is an assessed valuation based, also an assessed valuation based limitation, but this one takes a look at the actual annual obligation to make debt service payments. And it also takes into account all the overlapping political subdivisions that a resident of the city of Sandusky is subject to be taxed by and or subject to be responsible for debt. So if you're living in Sandusky and the county issues some debt, their debt comes into this calculation. Obviously, the city's debt comes in. Certain types of school debt will come in, as well as the other entities listed here, the Parks District, potentially the Health District, and both Lorraine and Ottawa County Health Districts as a possibility because of the overlapping nature of those entities. So it's a debt service test. And so we anticipate for 2027 to be the highest year in slide 2 or 3 of total debt service obligations that come under this limitation. And then it's converted to how much millage is it required to raise funds for that debt. And it never is actually the property taxes that are paid that are used to service the debt, but it's used here for the debt limitation. Income tax dollars, other dollars in the budget are used to actually make the debt service payments, but for the sake of this test, it's an assessed valuation millage-based test. And so what the state law says is that no one resident of the city of Sandusky can be levied or obligated to pay debt service for all these overlapping entities in excess of 10 mils, okay? And so all these parties are limited to this 10 mil, and if they participated because of the issue that they issue right now, the county's debt is only, is 0.37 mils worth. The city, as we have scheduled here, is getting close to 3 mils. You subtract that total of 3.2 mils from the 10 mils, and that's what's available, okay? And then what we have to do for this test is we take the difference, which is 6.7 mils, and we say, okay, how much debt service could that generate if we wanted to stress test this limitation? And in this case, we also, just as a general practice, we like to put out there for our clients the idea of reserving, and when you're looking at the debt limitation, reserve 1 mil for for emergencies. Just if something, tornado comes through town, whatever, some cleanup, something that's totally unexpected, at least reserve 1 mil in your limitation test for that. So that's what we've done here, and then once we take the 1 mil out, we come up with a total possible debt issuance of $39 million under this test. And that's an issuance based on potential debt service dollars of $3.126 million. If we went to the whole 6.7 mils, the city could issue up to $46 million of debt without that 1 mil in reserve. So then we've looked at 2 debt limitations, and the way the statutes read, it's which of those limitations actually ties your hands the most, which is most limiting. And in this case, the most limiting factor is not the indirect debt, not this one, but because, this one says you can issue up to $46 million. It's actually the previous one that says the balance of this limitation is only 3.3 million. So since that's more limiting, that's the one that you're stuck with on page 6 there. We've been through this before, but it gets a little more complicated when there's more issues involved. So maybe I should stop there and see if there's any questions on the limitations.
The one thing I'd point out is, these are fairly antiquated notions that are still embedded in the Ohio Revised Code. These harken back to a day before we had an income tax. Certainly gives no consideration to the fact that we have an admissions tax and a parking tax. When we take a look at the amount of debt service that we're looking at relative to the size of the general obligation debt service relative to the size of the city's general fund, anybody, any household, any business would look at this as entirely reasonable and entirely supportable. I mean, we do have a situation in which the General Assembly, back when they were taking horses to Columbus, adopted this limitation and it was fiscally sound at the time because that was the only source of income, with the real estate taxes. Now cities have all sorts of other sources of income, and it's a little bit like saying, okay, a bank is going to make a loan on the basis of what your income is. All sources of income today. And it's a little bit like a bank saying, okay, well, we're only going to consider the source of income you had when you graduated from high school. And that was, let's say, when any of us graduated from high school, you might have gone on and gotten a job for $15,000 or something like that. And we've gone on life and we've done other things and gotten additional education or experience, and now we make more than that. And the bank says, no, when you're 18, that's when you maxed out. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but I'm making the point because a cynical mind might look at this, and there are some folks who look at this way and say that we're looking to evade the debt limitation. And nothing could be further from the truth. What we're looking to do is to make sure the city is positioned in a financially reasonable and flexible manner so that we have resiliency. That was the word I was looking for. We want to be in a resilient position so that should something come along, we have this ability to do additional borrowing. But this is very reasonable. And I wanted to make that comment because I know some people do watch these meetings on tape. We don't have members of the public here today, but some people look at this and they say, why are you doing this? And I think that's exactly why, because we're dealing with an outdated piece of legislation, but the state has, as it does sometimes, it says, okay, well, yeah, I mean, we're going to leave that in place, but you can do this certificate of participation, and that's fine. So this is entirely consistent with what the legislature supports, and we're just taking advantage of one of the other tools that's available to us.
Thanks for that. And there's other analogies that we could bring to play, but that's a great look back at how these laws came into effect and why we have to live under them. I was just at a school conference yesterday in Columbus, and our good friend Jude Hammond gave a presentation about, from a school perspective, all the handcuffs that schools have on for raising revenues, House Bill 920 and the 20 mil floor. Again, these were made by decisions made in Columbus that touch every subdivision in Ohio, and we need flexibility, and that, you're exactly right. That's what the cops do. There are some other legal pledges we could make in the legislation that authorizes the debt that also helps us work around some of the limitations. Again, within reason, within budgetary constraints, but we do still have other flexibilities. But just strictly by the two tests that we have to look at, this is how things play out with everything that's on the table right now, without changing course on rec center, without changing course on the landings. So it's, as Michelle and I talk, the city's just, been transformed by these projects and will continue to transform for the better. And here we're able to afford it as well. So I think it's all very good news.
I liked your, Mr. Murray, I liked your analogy. Hopefully people realize that. I mean, to move forward, we have to be able, we can't just take it out of our checkbook and do everything we're doing downtown and everywhere in the city. I mean, we have to be fiscally responsible in our borrowing. And I think going in this direction, as you had indicated, makes just good sense. I'd like to see the 1.2% bonds we got once before too, but it's not going to happen.
Right. So since the debt limitations are based essentially, both of them, on assessed valuation, we always keep track of how assessed valuation is behaving. And this is a history back to 2007, before the recession. That's kind of our cutoff these days, because there was reality before the recession and there's reality since the recession. And we obviously had a dip in this, which would, through those years where assessed valuation was down, put pressure on those limitations, because the denominator was lower. So fortunately now, with reappraisals, we are finally back above, in total assessed valuation, above the pre-recession totals. So that's a good sign. We like to see this as an upward sloping graph. And so just to highlight this is where we've been. This appears to be where we're headed. I'm not sure that, the robust growth. In fact, we haven't really gotten credit for the 2020 real estate boom yet, right? With the reappraisal?
This year.
Yeah.
This year.
Yeah. So,
Is this similar, if I may ask, is this similar to this shape of this chart, similar to what you see in other counties, or are we a little dissimilar in terms of kind of remaining lower longer?
that's a great question. No, there's been an awful lot of cities. And again, it depends on where they're at in their reappraisal cycle. But this dip has been pretty prevalent in most subdivisions in Ohio over time. Now, in the presentation I watched yesterday, they took a few school districts that had 40% growth in one reappraisal year, So it really, that far right column is extremely high compared to the history. So in that regard, we're a little different in that we're just a little more steady in our growth. And once the reappraisal does hit, do we have estimates?
So the reappraisal was done last year.
Done this year, so it's.
2023 they did it, so it is in 2024.
Okay, good.
This is
So,
all of Erie County, to be clear.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is the total assessed valuation just for the city.
Just for the city?
Just for
Okay,
the city.
That's what I want to say. Thank you.
And then just want to kind of wrap up with a look at interest rates. This chart is a chart of municipal bond rates on a long-term basis. It's a spot rate of 20-year municipal bonds in the AA rated category throughout the country. And we like to look at it historically, back to when I bought my condo in Huron for 16% variable rate interest, and bring it to current day. So yeah, we've been as high as 13% with municipal rates on this 20-year look, and now we're down, under 4%. So for 20-year debt, we can get something in the range of 4%, which is certainly better than it was even in the 6 months ago. You can see in the blue graph. We did peak there for a little bit, and since last summer, we've been coming down. We're starting to trend up a little bit with inflation, continued inflation worries. But pick your article from the financial papers to decide, what is likely to happen between now and the end of the year. I'm hearing as many as potentially 3 Fed rate cuts by the end of the year. One might be even as much as 50 basis points. On the other hand, with the inflation news last week, there's a lot of jitters in the market that say they might have to curb some of those cuts. So we will just have to see how it plays out. The consensus does seem to be that there will be cuts However, they may not occur until the fourth quarter. So we will continue to hold our breath and see what happens. And then the last interest rate graph is a little more telling. What this is, we call this the interest rate curve. And what happens here is, you would expect short-term interest rates to be low and lower than long-term interest rates, which would be an upward sloping yield curve. Unfortunately, with these Fed rate overnight rates where they are, short-term rates are unusually high compared to long-term rates. We call this an inverted yield curve, where short-term rates are higher. It's wonderful for your personal finances. You can buy 3-month treasuries for almost 5.5% right now. And if you wanted to go out 10 years, you could get a lot less on your income. So that's just the state of the market. Municipal rates follow Fed rates. And so the reason this goes out years, when we do a 20-year bond issue, it's actually typically 20 separate loans, each year having a maturity, and you could have investors in any one of those years buying those bonds and say, I only want to be out 5 years on this bond, so I want the 5-year bond and I'll pay you this interest rate for that. So that's why it's a curve going out over time, to demonstrate the time value of money and how investors are likely to react to any debt that we put out there for issuance. We will, and this is considerably different than last year or even 18 months ago, where short-term rates are high. And then when you hit the mid-range there where they're low, then it's very much like a normal interest rate curve. Eventually, when Fed rates come down, the left-hand side of that curve will drop, and it will be a nice upward sloping yield curve. Fortunately, when short-term rates are high, yeah, the first couple of years you're paying higher than normal on those couple of bonds. They get paid off sooner than the rest of the bond issue, and you get back into a normal curve with the rest of the issue. So the overall average could get you closer to that 4 or maybe less than 4% for a 20-year bond. So it's unusual times in the interest rate market, but we'll figure out where this goes by keeping track of the headlines. So that is everything I had to present.
So
Open
just,
to any other questions?
Some light reading, and now where's your crystal ball?
Just open the paper today and you'll see the same crystal ball I have.
Mr. Chairman, I have one brief question.
I guess I was going to get some questions, and I was going to look down and see who would have any questions of Mike. Go.
Yeah, just, do you have a sense of what impact this may have on the overall rating from the agency standpoint with the additional capacity that you're going to place with this offering?
Great question. We have continually tested the rating agencies with the city's credit, so we have good communications with Moody's with regard to plans that the city has percolating and what the intentions of the city are. And so that communication with Moody's is terribly important,
right,
so that they don't get surprised by anything we're doing.
And our rating would stay doing this pretty much the same?
I see no threats to the city's credit rating at this point.
You know, I've heard that from.
The COP does have a slightly higher cost because it's not considered GO, so can you just speak to that so everyone's aware of
Right,
the
yeah, because
implications of the COP
again, with my
structure
example
versus
on some of the debt that's exempted, if it's self-supporting based on water revenues or some other revenue base, it typically has, investors look at that as a more risky investment.
Right.
And COPS, and because it's a lease structure and it's not a typical GO bond, and, Michelle's going to have to find room in the, and she has it, we had the revenue screen up, but find money in the general fund to make those COPS payments. But so to the investor, that looks like revenue debt, and it's considered it for all of those tests. And because it's considered a little more risky, they usually demand a slightly higher interest rate. And fortunately, in the historical chart, we really are still kind of at reasonable levels. And as a result, the difference between general obligation debt and revenue debt is compressed. And we are estimating only about 5 or 10 basis points difference
Yeah, that's not,
to compensate investors for that additional perceived risk. Great question.
thank you, Mike.
Is there any other questions from? Michelle and John, would you like a motion of some sort from the committee that we have heard this presentation and consider this the reasonable way to go? I'm not exactly sure how to phrase that, but I think that would at least let the commission that's not here and the general public know that we have listened to this and understand it as best as you can.
If we may, I'll jump in here for a second, just so everyone has an idea on timing of this. So our note renewal is September 6th of this year. So every time we do some kind of debt issuance, absolutely, it will be in front of City Commission for a vote.
Right.
But prior to that note being renewed, we want to drop off the long-term financing for the Justice Center. That's where the COPS financing will come in place. So I greatly think the City Commission loves to hear from the Finance Committee that you've heard this presentation. They would love to hear that you guys back this presentation. Going down farther, like the Landings project, we have plans right now for 70% design. We were supposed to have 100% design of the landing by the end of March. We haven't seen them yet. So as this project moves forward, we'll look at financing for each one of these as the time comes, and that legislation will be coming back in front of City Commission for approval to go out and take these out to the bond market. On the rec center bonds, we haven't even finalized the selection of the final design team. That will be going to commission in May next month of, the rec center design. So once the rec center's designed, then we'll go into looking for bid and things like that, and then we'll have financing for the rec center next year. So all of these things aren't going to be happening this year, but the most important and most pressing will be the COPS financing and doing that in the near future.
Yeah, that timing would be kind of over the summertime so that we can get the bond issue, or the COPS issue prepared, marketed, and closed before the September 6th due date on the notes that are outstanding. So we'll need that money in-house to pay off the notes that are coming due. So those are really the two issues. Well, it needs to be decided what's going to happen with the landings debt at this point. Yeah. So discussion for another day.
I would entertain a motion that we reviewed the debt summary presentation from Simpson and Associates and consider it reasonable. I guess that's the best terminology I can come up with, unless somebody else does. So can I have a motion such?
So moved.
Yeah, I'll second.
Second. Probably ought to take a roll call on this one.
Sure, absolutely. Mr. Allen?
Yes.
Mr. Stahl?
Yes.
Mr. Nichols?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Ramey?
Yes.
Mr. Russos?
Yes.
Mr. Orzak?
Yes.
And Miss what's my name? Miss Reader says yes.
Okay. Motion passes, and we appreciate it every time you come in. Going all the way from back to 2008 and some very interesting situations. So, but again, the city, in my opinion, is on sound fiscal ground, been managed properly, and we've done an awful lot of great projects, and the city has become a sparkling eye. God's not going to make any more of that stuff that's out there called Lake Erie, so it's something we needed to do, and I think I commend everybody in the city for their actions and what they've done.
Well, thank you for your time. I enjoy coming here every day.
Thank you.
It's the most
Mike.
robust relationships we have with our clients, and we truly treasure it. It goes back to the 90s. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and yet I've been doing it for the city for over 30 years within, hopefully that historical perspective pays off in a thorough understanding of what the city's plans are and what we need
First of all,
to,
thank you
how
for
we
being
need to
here so
advise.
early in the morning, and a very good presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.
Michelle, you have some March financial information you would like to talk to us about?
I really don't have anything pressing, but I figured while we were meeting, we'd just do a quick overview, if that's okay?
Okay, that's fine, just something that, yes.
So for the March overview of the financials, you'll see on the screen here, we have our three major revenue sources. The blue line is your income tax. You can see that we're pretty similar to where we were last year in 2023. Lodging tax and emissions tax, very similar to same time last year. Here's the total general fund revenue. Again, very similar to where we were at last year. There really isn't anything alarming in any of these reports for March. Your expenses for the general fund, top 5 departments, blue line is the police department. It looks orange, but it's usually red, is the fire department. Gray line is the horticulture and public realm division. Yellow line is municipal court. And the lighter blue line is the administrative support. And as we've talked before, that administrative support line does include the transfers. So that's why you'll see that spike starting in 2022 because of the increased admission and parking tax that we received. Here's the expenses again in the general fund listed by category. Top line on the blue is wages and fringe benefits. You'll see in 2024, the total for wages and fringe benefits is $3.7 million. That is still under the expenses that we had in 2019, which is great to see. The yellow line is the transfers. Again, the increase was due to the additional transfers due to additional partnership dollars with Cedar Fair. The orange line is contractual services, pretty steady there, and supplies and materials saw a slight increase in 22 and 2023. It's down a little bit in 2024, but I think that's just a matter of timing. They haven't ordered as many supplies in the first 3 months of this year compared to last year. Here is the general fund total expenditures and transfers listed out. Again, 2023 and 2024 are very similar. And our cash balance at the end of March is, $2,000 difference from where we ended in March of last year. Again, very similar, nothing alarming. Revenue and expenses seem to be in line, basically very similar to where they were last year. And here's our full-time employee count. We're at 245 full-time employees as of the end of March. Police and fire obviously are going to be our biggest employment counts in departments. Fire department is completely full. Police department's still looking for new applicants. So they're having a test, I think, tomorrow even. So we're looking, always looking for additional police officers, it seems. The other thing we'll mention is that the payroll stabilization fund has a balance of $416,000 at the end of March.
When does that word payroll hit again? I've lost track of it, I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, I can't remember if it's every 7 or 11 years, so we've got some time.
Okay.
It just happened in
Everybody's,
2020.
think we got notification, there's an extra payroll every so many years, and that's one of the things that saved us was the payroll stabilization fund.
Seems like that was about 2-3 years ago.
That's
2020. Yeah, we had one in 2020.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, one thing I point out for public consumption is that we get, every so often, we get some inquiries about our cash balance, and some people look at that, that's a nice juicy piece of money. Why don't we go spend that for something or other that's important to some constituency? And the answer is, while it's larger, it has increased as the city's general fund has increased. We target a 15 to 20% cash balance because that's just a fiscally responsible thing to do, so we have funds in case something occurs. And also because, we have big swings in our revenue and our cash balance if you look at it on a month-to-month basis, because we have all the seasonal revenue in the form of a lot of income tax, but certainly the admissions tax and the parking tax. So that is something that is increased proportionate to our general fund. It's not some stash that we've set, money that we've set outside. What we can spend on a day-to-day basis. So I just want to, every so often, I try to remind the public of that. And these days, we're earning pretty good interest on it, too, which has been a nice kick up in terms of income.
If I can also interject, that's something that Moody's looks at when they're doing our rating, and that's helped us. We, again, targeted what Mr. Murray had said for percentages, and that's helped.
Well, we've also got to look forward to this debt service that we're talking
So,
about.
I mean, it just, yes.
Yeah.
That's all I had. If there's any
I
questions, I'm
think
happy to
that's
answer.
just- Do we need to take any action on that? I think that's just a report. Okay. Is anybody on for public participation? Well, that's their loss, because I think Mike did a great job of explaining things. Yes. So, does anybody from committee have anything else? Again, thank you for coming out. And again, I think this committee has worked well, and hopefully it helps the commission. And so, if not, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.